So today we are here with Ed Shawe-Taylor, who is an art historian and art tutor. Would you like to explain a little bit about yourself before we start?
Yeah, so I'm Ed Shawe-Taylor. I'm a PhD student at Oxford studying Islamic art history, and I work mainly with the Fatimids. So this is a dynasty in 10th to 12th century Egypt. But I'm here today in my capacity as a tutor for art history abroad. And we run gap year trips to Italy and other countries, teaching students about art, teaching students in front of objects, in front of paintings, in front of buildings. And this is a job I've done for the last 4 or 5 years.
That's amazing. So what sparked your initial interest in history of art when you were younger?
I've always been interested in the visual. My mum was an artist when she was younger, she still is today. And so we'd always, when we were younger, we'd always go on holidays and we'd see galleries and churches and museums. When I was younger, I used to hate that. It was the worst bit of the holiday. But when I got a bit older, maybe 16, 17, I sort of realised that I'd accumulated a fair bit of visual, I guess, a visual understanding. And I remembered more than I'd perhaps realised. And it was only when I myself went on an AHA course as a student after leaving school that I really realised this is something that I wanted to do. Then I went the more circuitous route to get to Arabic. I did Arabic at university and then ended up kind of going that way around and studying Islamic art history.
So how come you chose Arabic at your university? Was that?
It was actually largely because of the advice of a teacher who's now here, Jim Sheppe. We used to have, in our history modules, I think like a lot of people in the UK, we did the Tudors when we were sort of 10, and then when we were 13 we did the Tudors again, and then when we were 15 we did more Tudors, and then 17 we did final take on the Tudors. And by the end of, I did history up to A level. By the point I got to my final year, I didn't feel like I wanted to be a historian. But what I hadn't realised is it was mainly just that I was bored with the subject matter. Then we had this option to write a sort of, I think it was called a portfolio. It was like a coursework essay, but it could be on whatever we wanted. And I remembered when we did the First World War, which we'd done every year in between doing the Tudors, and they had always had this phrase that the Ottomans were the sick man of Europe. I don't know if you ever came across that. And I thought, I don't know who the Ottomans even are. I always learned this set phrase. So I ended up doing a bit of reading and watching a documentary, and I learned all about the Ottoman Empire. And it stretched all the way back to 1300, and I thought, how did I not know about this? I'd learned that they had been at the gates of Vienna for 200 years and that they were so important in European history. I thought, why don't I know this? And then that sort of spiraled into learning about other Islamic civilizations and learning about Islamic culture, about, again, how the history of Europe is so intertwined with the history of Islam. And then I was speaking to Jim Sheppe about this, and I said, I'm actually quite interested in history. I've decided I do like history, maybe I want to be a historian. And he said, oh, well, if you just do history, you'll have the same problem again. You'll go to university, the first 2 years you'll do these same things that you've done
before.
So do Arabic, or pick a language that's relevant, and then you can sort of fast track to being specifically about what you want to study, plus you'll have these tools, these language tools that you need to study.
Oh, wow.
So
Have you been there yourself? Or
so to the Arabic speaking world. So I went to Jordan. I lived in Jordan for a year during my undergraduate. So I was there when I was about 20. I haven't been back to Jordan since, but I've been to Egypt in between, and I'm planning a research trip to Egypt for my PhD in sometime in the new year.
Oh, so to do with Islamic art, what would you say is your favourite sort of subtopic of it? What do you like researching the most? What's most interesting to you?
That's a good question. It's a tricky one. I think what I find most interesting is understanding how different people have to work together to make an individual piece of artwork. So whenever we think of buildings, or whenever we think of, say, architecture, painting, especially in the European context, you might think, okay, Michelangelo designs the Laurentian Library, or such and such, Rembrandt paints these self-portraits. It's very personal. It's to do with an individual. Whereas if you look at more medieval art generally, but specifically in this case Islamic art, you'll see, say, a piece of woodwork very highly decorated but with very beautiful calligraphy on it. So that means that you had to have a calligrapher as well as a woodworker, and so two people have to work together.
Okay.
Well, how does a calligrapher prepare his designs? He must work on paper, so he must draw on paper, share them with the calligrapher, or the same thing with ceramics and illustrations and all these different facets that make visual art that require collaboration. And I'm interested in sort of breaking down how those collaborations happened. Yeah.
Oh wow. So from talking about these collaborations in different ways, Islamic art's been influenced and changed over time. Would you say in society today there's been any influence of things which you might pick up on as maybe a historian, which has been influenced by Islamic art?
Yes, I think lots and lots of things. If you study Islamic history, if you study Arabic, if you study Islamic art history, you become slightly insufferable to people that you hang out with, because you're so often going to say, oh, that comes from Arabic, that comes from Islamic civilization. Off the top of my head, food, a lot of food, when a lot of the words that we have for food come from Arabic, because so much of the culture of European food was derived from Arabic sort of botany and the ability of the Arabs to propagate new species that were coming from further east. So, thinking about somewhere like Italy, you have so many things we associate with Italy: coffee, sugar, lemons, aubergines, artichokes. All of these words are Arabic words because they've all come from Arabic. And we see it in art as well. Like, one of my favourite things to point out to students when we're going around Italy for art history abroad is what's sometimes called pseudo inscriptions. So when you see these medieval paintings of saints, very often they're wrapped in really, really elaborate silk. As you can imagine, you're trying to make your saints look impressive, so you depict them wearing the most expensive sort of materials available at the time. Very often you'll see on the border of these silks this sort of weird pattern that the artist has done as if it was a sort of abstract motif, but actually it's because the silks that they were buying had Islamic inscriptions, had Arabic inscriptions around the hem. And so when they've painted them, they've made it seem as if it's a pattern, but actually it's just Arabic writing, often quite overtly Islamic, with Muslim sentiments. I've found an example once in the Accademia in Florence, which is where Michelangelo's David is, small little icon, and you can quite clearly see on the cuff, it says, Muhammad is the messenger of God. But it's a picture of the Virgin Mary, so it's a complete it's a complete surprise, and the artist clearly didn't know what they were doing. So that sort of thing I find really interesting, the way that you can see Islamic civilization influencing Italian and European art.
So talking about this Italian European art and your art history abroad, can you talk to us more about that and what that consists of?
Yes, so I did art history abroad as a student, and we went all over Italy, and this was before I started with my Arabic. This was in my gap year. And so I was seeing all these amazing masters of painting, architecture, sculpture, and it was just an amazing experience, particularly because it was so focused on really looking at the thing in front of you. It wasn't sort of about secondary readings and reading about secondary readings, and that it was all about what you're seeing in the moment. So that was a great start, and that gave me a really good grounding in the Italian Renaissance and the Baroque, and this sort of and then also with the classical art that you see in Italy and in Rome in particular. Then when I came back to the role as a tutor, I had already, I think it was my final, just after I finished my Arabic degree, and suddenly I could sort of bring new things to the table that other tutors didn't necessarily think about before because they didn't have that background. And so in particular, one course which I feel very sort of personally strongly about is the Southern course, which is one of our summer courses. It's just a 2-week course, but it's where we go all over Sicily.
Oh, wow.
And in Sicily, you find amazing examples where Islamic art is infused with Byzantine art this is during the Norman reign, so not too far off from sort of 1066 when if we're thinking of English history. But suddenly you see these incredible pleasure palaces and chapels and all these amazing architectural motifs that come from Islamic art, but they're being used in the Norman context. And that course now, especially since I've been able to sort of tweak it and play around with it a bit more, I've added a few more kind of interesting sites that I find interesting as an Islamic art historian. That course I think is really, really special, and I think the sort of enthusiasm really has bled through to the students and the other tutors as well.
That's amazing. What would you say for, say, a student who's unsure about doing art history or wants to take it further? What would be your advice to them? I
think that art history shouldn't be considered as something that is only going to be valuable as a sort of grade on a page or on a CV. I think that everyone would benefit from art history. I think it's one of these subjects that, I mean, if we were really stripping it back to its most sort of essential, what you're doing when you engage with art is you're just learning to use your eyes. You're learning to engage with the visual world. And whether that's sort of learning how to break down a city when you're walking around a new city you've not been to before, starting to work out where those patterns of influence are, or where the centre is, which buildings are sort of speaking to which other buildings and which regions. I think that this is something that adds a lot to anyone's daily life. I don't think it has to be something that you consider a kind of, I need a grade, or I want a professional certificate. So in terms of what we do at AHA, I think anyone should consider it, and I think that if you do, it's like learning to read. It's a thing that opens a doorway to engaging with an element of culture that it's surprisingly easy to just sort of let wash over you. But also, as in the context of taking it as a subject, I think that it's also a shame how few people want to take the A-level of art history, because I think, and because I always wish that I didn't, and I'm now, you know, a PhD student essentially and an Islamic art historian, but I definitely had to go the long way round in acquiring those tools, which if I had taken an A-level, I would have had that training earlier, and it would have been better and more enriching.
Yeah. So where would you see yourself 10 years from now with the skills you've been developed?
I mean,
what's your aspirations?
I'd be very happy if I had a job at all. That would be a good result. I love the idea of working with Islamic art in some form. In working in museums with Islamic art collections, that would be amazing. I mean, I'd count myself very lucky if I had that kind of experience. It's obviously there aren't that many collections with significant Islamic art collections, and so I would, you know, it's quite competitive, but that would be a career that I would be really, really proud of, and I think I'd find very very thrilling. But I think there's lots of other ways that I could use it that I would still think of as interesting. I was talking the other day with someone who's worked for another project that I was working on. We got a message from someone who's working on Assassin's Creed games, if you know those.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
And they someone mentioned that they had been asked to help out as a researcher on one of those games, and I was thinking, okay, there are other ways that you can use these visual skills that aren't necessary. Exactly, when they recreate in those games, they kind of recreate, say, they might recreate Cairo in 12th century, or Baghdad in the 9th century, and they sort of consult art historians to confirm whether they're on the right lines with different, you know, city plans and stuff. So that made me think, okay, maybe there are more ways than I had necessarily considered to try and use the skills that you learn as an art historian.
Yeah, that's amazing. So what would you say if you could pick one piece of Islamic art, or art in general, to have on your wall? What would it be? Anything, or a sculpture, anything in your house?
What a good question. Can I cheat and take something for the ceiling?
Yeah.
What I'm actually going to be talking about later today is the ceiling of the Cappella Palatina, which is in Palermo, and it's an entirely Islamic construction. It was made entirely by Islamic craftsmen, but it's set in this Christian space, in this small. Cappella Palatina means like palace chapel, so it's in the royal chapel basically, and it's an incredibly ornate carved wooden ceiling with what they call honeycomb vaulting. It's an Islamic style vaulting. It's very intricate, and all over it it's got these amazing images of sort of courtly pleasures. It's got people playing instruments, it's got people drinking wine, it's got people dancing, it's got people playing chess and various things like that. And I just think it's amazing, and it's my favourite place that we go on AHA, and it's one of my favourite places in the world, and it's one of the best preserved pieces of Islamic woodwork or Islamic vaulting in the entire world. So I think that's what I would, I mean, assuming that I get a sort of replica and don't have to necessarily steal it from the place that it's currently, then I think that's what I would go for. Yeah, it's an absolute gem, and it's one of my favourite places that we go on AHA, and the students always love it as well. Yeah,
I can imagine. That's brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions, or are you?
No, I think I'm. Yeah.
Is that